You are looking at the aftermath of a private plane crash in a San Diego military community early this morning. The NTSB says the jet struck power lines and then collided with a house about 2 miles from the Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport where it was planning to land. A number of vehicles caught fire after jet fuel rained down on the residential street. 6 people were on board the Cessna 550. The San Diego Fire Assistant Chief believes no one on the aircraft survived. Among those killed in the crash was music booking agent Dave Shapiro, according to the Associated Press. A fire official said it was foggy at the time of the crash, and air traffic control recordings show that the weather system was not working at the airport where the plane was attempting to land. Here's part of what the pilot told air traffic control shortly before the crash.
Got the Miramar automated weather for 0955 Zulu with wind calm, visibility 1/2, and indefinite ceiling 200.
All right, doesn't sound great, but we'll give it a go.
Joining me now to discuss the CNN aviation correspondent Pete Montine and CNN safety analyst and former FAA safety inspector David Soucy. Pete, what more do we know about the leading up to the crash? And just listening to that recording, what does it mean to you?
The recording is really telling here, Anderson, and it says that the pilots used the weather report at nearby Marine Corps Air Station Miramar and that the weather was very poor, 200-foot cloud ceilings, a half-mile visibility, much too low to make what would be an acceptable landing in what's called instrument conditions, meaning pilots flying in sole reference to the instruments. The pilots used that weather report from Miramar and not Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport, the point of their intended landing, because we learned this afternoon that that weather system at that airport had been out since Tuesday. But perhaps the biggest finding here is the finding this afternoon from the NTSB that this plane hit power lines before it slammed into that neighborhood. It was that low. We went back and looked at the flight tracking data, and if this plane was on the proper approach path at the point of the crash site, should have been at about 1,300 feet. The last return on the open source flight tracking sites shows the plane at 500 feet. Much too low here, and opens a whole can of worms when it comes to questions in this investigation.
Yeah, David, what stands out to you at this point?
Well, the fact that he was that low and the fact that this aircraft was a 1985 aircraft. Now, typically an aircraft will have ground position warnings that'll tell them how low they are to the ground. So I have a feeling that he really didn't know what altitude he was at the time. And typically you'd get a warning that says you're too low, you're at this many feet, you're at that many feet. But in 1985, that wasn't required on the aircraft. And I don't see that we've got any information that it was upgraded as required in 1992 when aircraft after that level had to have it installed.
So it should have had a automatic warning with an upgrade.
Correct. Yeah, if it had been upgraded to that new system, it would have had ground positioning radar, which tells it how far it is off the ground. And if you get too close and you're out of that ILS, it'll tell you you're too low, you're too high, wherever it is, it'll tell you where you're at with it. And it doesn't appear to me that he had that with him. But again, that's a backup system. That's after the fact that you're not where you're supposed to be in the first place. So the critical thing that stands out to me is, once again, FAA facility, the ASOS, the weather reporting, the automated weather reporting, was not working at the airport. And in that area, the fog moves so quickly, you really have to have localized. 3 miles isn't even enough to get a good weather report of what's going on at that airport.
Pete, I didn't understand. You were saying that it should have been at more than 1,000 feet of elevation, but it was at 500. How high was it when it struck power lines?
That is the big question here, Anderson. We know the power lines were not much higher topographically in that canyon there near the neighborhood. And so this is something that investigators will really key in on, why this flight was so low. We were able to interpolate this by looking at what's called the approach plate. It's essentially like a dance by numbers card that pilots use to descend them down to the runway if they're in what's called instrument conditions, meaning they can't see the ground until the last second. They're in clouds. They're only flying in reference to what's in front of them, what the indications are on the instrument panel there. And if you interpolate that, if you sort of extend the path out, the plane should have been at about 1,300 feet there. Now, the plane can do something called a step-down approach instead of following a gradual glide path down to the runway. But even still, the weather report at the time exceeds the minimum, meaning that there's a legal baseline that the plane can't continue into if the weather is so bad. This weather was below the minimum, meaning that it couldn't have gone in there. This flight theoretically should have landed at what's called an alternate, meaning divert to another airport where you can make a successful landing, play the ace, find a place that has a better weather condition, and land there.
Pete Montine, David Susi, thanks very much. We'll try to learn more.
The death toll likely set to rise from a fiery plane crash in a California neighborhood. Officials saying tonight at least 2 people are dead, but the NTSB just revealing 6 people were on board the small private plane that crashed into a San Diego neighborhood. The impact destroying homes and vehicles. Somehow, and it is a miracle, that no one in those homes died, a true miracle. We are learning the automated weather system at the airport where the plane was attempting to land stopped working about a day before the crash. Stephanie Elam is out front.
We ran outside and saw just sparks flying up.
A private business jet crashing into a dense neighborhood roughly 6 miles north of downtown San Diego in the early morning fog after hitting power lines about 2 miles from the airport where it was going to land. That's according to the National Transportation Safety Board.
We got multiple explosions over here. We're doing evacuation. We got multiple houses on fire.
The crash setting at least 10 homes on fire and burning cars up and down the street. First responders arrived on scene just minutes later, rushing to put out the flames and search the homes.
We're going to probably have several hundred people evacuated.
The FAA says there were 6 people on board the plane which disintegrated on impact. Among the dead, music booking agent Dave Shapiro, who owned the plane, according to Billboard magazine. Authorities say they are still making further identifications. Jet fuel spilled across multiple blocks in one of the largest military housing units in the world, according to Navy officials.
Front yards are completely saturated with fuel. Needs extreme caution doing evacs.
The jet was heading toward the small Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport in San Diego just before it crashed. Visibility, according to weather data, was at about half a mile at the time of the accident.
If you look at the path that it took behind me here, you can see that its trajectory came through this direction, took out the front of that house, and it ended up here to the right behind me.
The pilot, checking into air traffic control, was told the weather station wasn't working, but was given weather data from a nearby airport.
Doesn't sound great, but we'll give it a go.
No emergency was reported before the crash. And officials say that really what happened in the middle of the night, I think it was before 4 a.m., that these neighbors really came to the aid of their neighbors to help them get out of these homes like this one, which is the most densely impacted, to get them out. And the smell of jet fuel is still very strong in the air here. And that's a large reason why a lot of these homes are still evacuated, as they will continue to process this and get more information on what happened here in this very densely packed community in San Diego. Aaron?
It's hard to hear those final words from the pilot. All right, thank you very much, Stephanie, and miracle for those on the ground.
Turning now to our national lead, residents of a military neighborhood in San Diego woke up to a horrifying scene of fire and destruction this morning after a private business jet struck power lines just moments before attempting to land. At least 8 were injured. 2 people were killed, including a well-known music booking agent, Dave Shapiro. CNN's Stephanie Elam is at the crash site in San Diego with new details.
We ran outside and saw just sparks flying up.
A Cessna Citation business jet crashing into a military housing neighborhood roughly 6 miles north of downtown San Diego in the early morning fog.
We got multiple explosions over here. We're doing evacuation. We got multiple houses on fire.
The crash setting at least 10 homes on fire and burning cars throughout the neighborhood. First responders arrived on scene just minutes later, rushing to put out the flames and search the homes.
We're going to probably have several hundred people evacuated.
At least 2 people on the plane died, and authorities say they are still making identifications and investigating how many people were on board.
We're looking at it as rostered on the plane was 6 individuals, so we're confirming that right now with the FAA and NTSB as they're getting on scene right now.
Jet fuel spilled across multiple blocks in one of the largest military housing units in the world, according to Navy officials.
Front yards are completely saturated with fuel. It's extreme caution doing evac.
The jet was heading toward the small Montgomery Gibbs Executive Airport in San Diego just before it crashed. Visibility, according to weather data, was at about a half a mile at the time of the accident.
If you look at the path that it took behind me here, you can see that its trajectory came through this direction, took out the front of that house, and it ended up here to the right behind me.
The pilot, checking into air traffic control, radioed in at 3 miles away.
Montgomery traffic citation 666 Delta Sierra, 3 miles, final 28.
The transmission giving no indication of any issue with the landing. No emergency was reported before the crash. And what we know now from the FAA is that there were 6 people on board. We know 2 people have been confirmed dead, but that person that you were talking about, Jake, Dave Shapiro, the co-founder of the Sound Talent Group, they rep indie music performers as well as hard rock and also some punk bands, according to Billboard magazine, was also the owner of that plane. But as far as who else was on that plane, we still don't know yet. Out here live, they've just put these fire trucks in the way. I think they're going about the delicate procedures of collecting the remains of people now and clearing out this area. And the scent here is still very strong of jet fuel in the air. So that's why people are still evacuated, Jake.
All right, Stephanie Elam in San Diego, thank you so much. Not a fun story to cover. Tough stuff.